Episode 1 of Down Cemetery Road begins in South Oxford with an introduction to Sarah Tucker. She works as an art conservationist and she certainly knows her stuff. Along with being intelligent, she's also supportive of her husband Mark, who's nervous as the bank's top client Gerard Inchon is coming over for dinner with his wife Paula. Things are made a little more awkward though when Wigwam and Rufus show and Sarah burns the food. The whole dinner takes a turn for the worst when Sarah and Gerard butt heads over the idea of kids. However, just before things really kick off, an explosion rocks the house. A building across town explodes and sends shockwaves across this small sleepy community. Firefighters believe it's a burst gas main, and while details are hazy, it seems like the only survivor is a little girl living inside that house. She survived purely from the wardrobe landing on top of her with the doors open. It's a miracle she's even alive, but she's rushed off to the hospital. Now, this girl happens to be the same little girl that Sarah bumped into on the way home from work a little earlier in the episode. At least, that's what Sarah thinks. Sarah heads to the hospital to drop off a note that Wigwam's kids have written for Dina. The hospital staff aren't particularly helpful and not forthright in giving out information. In fact, they're actually quite hostile and usher her out the building. This only rouses more suspicions though. At this point, we're introduced to government agent Hamza Malik. He works in intelligence and threats. He shows up at work in a rather cheerful mood, but is quickly chewed out for it. The cover story of the gas explosion in this small town is just that, a cover. In reality, Hamza and his department are behind the incendiary used during a covert operation that's gone horribly wrong. Hamza is forced by his superior, called C, to mop this mess up for all their sakes. And news of Sarah nosing around also reaches the government here, who decide to keep a close eye on her. The thing is, the cover-up has already begun, and Sarah realises she stumbled right into the middle of it all without even trying. She discovers a doctored image of the police outside the exploded house. Now, one official picture without the child, but Sarah holds that same image with Dina in. Now, given Sarah's restoration expertise, she can see residual traces of the image having been doctored. Now, Sarah shows up at the police with this, where she learns that Dina's file is apparently flagged, which means it's off limits. Now, Sarah stumbles upon the private investigative office of Zoe Brom and Joe Silverman next, and they're married PIs with a very imaginative business name of Oxford Investigations. And they're eking out a living with little cases to try and pay the bills, but nothing that tasty has really come across their desk. Zoe is clearly resentful of her husband too, while Joe is just trying to get by. That is until Sarah shows up. Sarah brings the Dina case across to Joe, who learns that the reason she's so invested in this is because Dina reminds her of the sort of inquisitive child she used to be back in the day. This could be just the break they need, and Joe intends to head down the pub to scout out the nurses. However, he's chewed out by Zoe, who doesn't think this is a particularly good allocation of resources. Seeing how disappointed her husband is though, she does backtrack a little, telling him to check the crime scene instead. Hamza catches wind of what's happening with the PIs in Oxford and scrambles to try and get Dina moved so he can lock this situation down. While this is going on, Gerard actually does help Sarah a little by using his contacts at the hospital to check on Dina. Apparently she'll be in ICU for a few more days before being moved. However, he also warns that things for Mark are not going too well at work, given he's out of his depth in shark-infested waters. As we find out later in the episode, Gerard's reason for being in the hospital has nothing to do with Dina, it actually centres on his wife losing their baby. Elsewhere, after buying a round of drinks at the bar, which doesn't help Joe's financial situation in the slightest, Joe rings Sarah and lets her know what he's found out. Now, someone has signed Dina's discharge summary and told the nurse to pack the kid a bag. Only nobody seems to know where she's being moved to, except that she's being moved that very night. Now, Sarah senses an opportunity here and decides to leave, scouting South Oxford Hospital and watching what happens. And when she gets there, she spies that familiar man from earlier in the episode and chases him through the hospital to the ICU. As Sarah hits the fire alarm to cause chaos and scrambles to find Dina outside. When she's loaded up into a car, Sarah gives chase on her bicycle, but she's run off by a white van driven by that same mysterious guy from before. Realising she's onto something big, Sarah shows up back at the PI office to see Joe, only there's a problem. She's shocked when she finds that he's actually dead. His wrists have been slashed and it's been made to look like a suicide. Episode 2 of Down Cemetery Road begins with confirmation that Zoe has been having an affair on Joe for quite a while. The news of Joe's death though hits her like a ton of bricks. She shows up at Oxford Police Station and is not convinced that Joe wanted to commit suicide, According to Zoe, he didn't do depression. There are a lot of debts though in their family, and despite their marriage crumbling apart, Zoe remains steadfast in her beliefs. Joe was also squeamish around blood, so slitting his wrist doesn't seem like the way he'd actually do it. Given Zoe is next of kin, she has the unenviable task of having to identify his body. En route though, she also learns that Sarah was the witness who found Joe initially. Zoe is a woman possessed here, determined to find exactly who did this and make them pay after identifying Joe's body. Meanwhile, Mark realises Paula's scarf left at their place is enough of a reason to drive up to the Cotswold to speak to Gerard personally. Sarah is not happy that he's turning her grief and shock into a business opportunity, and Mark is not exactly supportive over how she's feeling. As Sarah heads out to get the scarf dry cleaned, Sarah pops by Oxford Investigations. Inside, she finds Amos, who happens to be Hamza's crony in the field. He warns Sarah off from following this line of inquiry before it's too late. Sarah has also attracted the attention of Zoe though, who does her research and shows up at the crime scene sniffing around. According to a local nearby, the council shut off the mains gas supply years ago for many of the residents. This throws the gas leak story into murky waters, while C, the man overseeing this whole catastrophe in the government, chews out Hamza Malik once again, demanding he get down to Oxford personally and keep Amos under control. As for Sarah, she starts to spiral when she speaks to Wigwam about her theories and realises with horror that a child she's chasing isn't the same one she saw in the tunnel that day. Apparently that girl is called Gracie. Now, Sarah is definitely onto something, despite her own doubts, as we see Hamza showing up to see Dina. She's been moved to a safe house where Amos is overseeing proceedings. Now Hamza speaks to Amos and he's shocked when the agent believes they should use Dina as bait for their target. And meanwhile, Zoe speaks to Sarah, who heads up to the rooftop of Oxford Uni, contemplating life and looking precariously over the edge. Zoe chews out Sarah for losing her zest for life and no longer wanting to fly, figuratively speaking, of course. Zoe is convinced now that the building was blown up and she wants to work with Sarah to get to the bottom of all this. Zoe is also here to drop off an invoice that Joe had for her, so there's also that too. Unbeknownst to them, Amos is actually watching Sarah's house from afar. Now in the morning, Sarah checks out Mark's phone, specifically for the video from the night of the explosion. Lo and behold, Mark actually captured footage of Downey watching in the distance. A message from Emma Assistant pops up on screen though, which throws Sarah off her game. As for Mark, he's angry that Sarah didn't bother to contact him and hasn't followed through with the dry cleaning either. Mark decides to stay in London that night while Sarah checks out the scarf and realises there's a blood stain there. Now, the last time she used the scarf was to open Joe's office, so it could be a significant clue that he was killed rather than committing suicide. As Sarah drops the scarf off at the station where the officers take it seriously and get forensics involved. This also flags up Dina's file. Hamza gives the green light to Amos to step it up a notch, which involves bringing him into the fold. This puts Sarah in a lot of danger and she immediately thinks she's being watched. And while Rufus keeps her company that night, Zoe shows up at Joe's wake where his mum encourages her to mourn for the sake of herself and for Joe. Back with Sarah for now though, she opens the letter Zoe dropped off the previous night. Reading it, she realises that it isn't just an invoice. Joe was going to drop the case, but wanted to invite her along to a monthly board game night too. However, he does mention looking into who died in the explosion that night, given he's put in a Freedom of Information request about the Singletons, which might point her in the right direction. Unfortunately, there's a problem. It turns out Rufus is actually in on all this, and he's the one who killed Joe. Rufus's real name is Axel, and he's an assassin in disguise. He's also the one who planted the bomb that night, but obviously the operation was botched. Rufus tries to choke out Sarah, but just as it looks like she's about to die, Downey bursts in through the front door and pulls the trigger of his gun. Episode 3 of Down Cemetery Road starts with Amos getting ready to patch up Sarah's place back to how it was. The bullet hole is gone, the body is carved up, and the door handle is replaced too. As Zoe returns to Oxford Investigations here, the bills are piling up and the atmosphere is eerily quiet without Joe there. The office is actually quite bright too, a far cry from the dingy colours in the first 2 episodes. Zoe shows up to see Mal, the shopkeeper, but even buying a little scratch ticket is an issue given she doesn't have enough in the bank to cover it. However, her exasperation doesn't extend to the investigation, which she brings Mal on board with. They check the cameras and find evidence that Rufus has been in there. Zoe heads over to Sarah's place next and predictably finds the place completely empty. She immediately notices the bathroom handle has been fixed and the place smells odd. Now Wigwam shows up and Zoe pretends to be a police officer. She manages to loosen Wigwam's lips, who reveals that Rufus just appeared one day. He's also a juggler by trade, along with being quite handy with DIY. Now when she sees Rufus's picture pinned up on the fridge, along with Wigwam admitting he's camera shy and doesn't like his picture being taken, she realises it's the same guy from the store's CCTV. As many of us may have realised by this point, given Ruth Wilson is such a prolific actress and the main character in the show, Sarah is still alive and held captive by Downey. Downey reassures her, pointing out that if they catch her, then they'll kill her. Sarah complies, but she decides to get in the front seat this time after her botched escape plan. Downey points out that he's been trying to find Dina to protect her too, but Sarah's noisy way of going to the police is just getting them in more trouble. Meanwhile, Hamza Malik is chewed out once more by C, who decides he doesn't want Amos on the case anymore. The unenviable task of delivering this news though falls to Hamza. That's not going to go over well, given Amos is currently mourning his brother. When Amos shows up at the office, he tells Hamza that he believes Downey has Axel's phone. Now when Hamza tries to let him go, it doesn't go well and Amos scares him into submission, promising to find Downey no matter what. Now the hierarchy goes higher than C here, and we get a first look at his boss, Talia Ross. She's the defense minister and she isn't exactly pleasant in the way she handles C. Meanwhile, Zoe catches Mark with Emma assistant. They get very close in the London subway and it becomes clear that he's having an affair on Sarah. Zoe follows him to his office and reveals that she's actually recorded the pair together. Speaking to Mark, who's not particularly bothered by Sarah's disappearance, Zoe rules him off the suspect list and instead adds him to the massive twat list instead. Unfortunately, Sarah soon finds out the hard way how dead her marriage actually is. In fact, she overhears Mark and Emma laughing about Sarah leaving him on the phone. It's horrible and it absolutely crushes her. Something doesn't add up for Zoe though, and she heads to the morgue, where Zoe finds a missing corpse for the John Doe. This rings her alarm bells, especially combined with the obvious disappearance of Dina, who's been kept off the records in that safe house. Zoe is exhausted and working round the clock to solve this, and given the missing body too, she deduces that this person could be the intended target, with Dina and Maddie caught in the crossfire. Her affair partner, Poland, then shows up and Zoe realises he could well be in on this too, especially when he warns her off from poking around. With Poland gone and Zoe fixed on this case, she heads back to the morgue and speaks to prospective live streamer Wayne once more. He drops casually that he's been writing his own facial recognition software and run it on a picture of Maddie's husband, Tommy Singleton. Now the initial thinking is that this John Doe is Tommy Singleton, but he probably didn't die in the blast, given there's no body at the morgue. The people behind this conspiracy have made it look like he did. However, we do see that he may well be a military vet, given his picture flashes up on screen when running the software. Elsewhere, Amos shows up at the safe house where he finds Tweedledee and Tweedledum waiting for him. They're the two new lackeys chosen to oversee Dina, and Amos scoffs at their appearance. He's also here to hand over a little teddy to Dina. It turns out it has a location tracker inside, with Amos watching from the shadows. Zoe heads over to see Joe's mum, Janice, and reveals that Zoe was murdered. As she breaks the news, Sarah decides to ring Zoe, courtesy of the crumpled business card in her pocket. However, Zoe doesn't answer initially. Now back at the hotel room, Downey is shocked when he realises Sarah has never met Dina, but he doesn't reveal his connection to the girl just yet. While he heads off to take a shower, Zoe rings Sarah back and she hurriedly picks up the phone, whispering Zoe down the receiver. Episode 4 of Down Cemetery Road begins right where we left off, as Zoe sends over a photo of Downey to Sarah's phone. He's officially been declared dead and the picture shows him in the army. Despite Zoe's insistence, Sarah though is loath to leave as she doesn't think Downey is that dangerous. I mean, he did save her life after all. Just like that though, Downey grabs a phone and smashes it to bits before collapsing on the bed. Downey has taken a drug called histropine and Sarah helps him out, making sure he's okay. As we later learn, Downey has a rare neurological condition and these pills are experimental. We also find out that Dina is the daughter of his friend. Tellingly though, he doesn't reveal who this friend is. Downey switches a combination on the safe, where Sarah initially stashed his gun to gain this intel. But when everything inevitably kicks off, he struggles to remember the code and has to leave it behind. Now after Amos's unscheduled arrival at the safe house, Hamza moves Dina away to a more secluded area. However, he's unaware that the guy has obviously placed a tracker in a teddy and knows where she's moving to. Now Amos also tracks down the hotel that Sarah and Downey are staying in. Sarah happens to be there when Amos shows up and she uses Sam, the quirky receptionist, to stall for time so she can scramble up and warn Downey. The pair just about manage to get away before Amos can get them, but it's certainly a close call. The word of this botched operation reaches Hamza too, who wants to take care of Amos permanently. He hires a couple of freelancers and sets to work putting this into action. Now Amos manages to subdue all three of them when they burst into his room that night, and he eventually lights the apartment on fire and burns it down, burning the evidence outright. Elsewhere, Zoe meets with DI Ash Farmer, the guy she spoke to at the station. After a flurry of texts in the middle of the night, he eventually sits down with her in a cafe. Now, he's looked through the forensics report and there's nothing here about a bomb. He also has the autopsy report on this John Doe too, which is signed off by a Dr. Isaac Wright. Staging a little car break-in to distract Dr. Wright, Zoe breaks into the man's office and takes his laptop. When Wright finds out, he rings C and sends him a picture of Zoe. Meanwhile, Sarah breaks into Gerard's house with Downey, believing it's the only safe place for them right now. He begrudgingly agrees to help and lets them stay for a few hours too. Now, Paula is the one who manages to twist Gerard's arm and help them out, but it doesn't take long for Downey to threaten him and get a few guns when he refuses. Downey looks set to leave in the middle of the night alone, but Sarah bursts out and convinces him otherwise. Just before they leave, Downey is quick to point out he's a marked man and these people are not messing about. Sarah has nowhere else to go though, and the pair ride off together. The final scene then shifts over to Zoe, who heads home, where a tarp has been put up on the wall with red writing spelling out the word stop, but she's not going to, is she? Episode 5 of Down Cemetery Road begins with a flashback to a military war zone. Downey is shocked and told to run as a helicopter drops a cloud of deadly chemicals, burning on impact. When Downey awakens, he finds Sarah in the woods learning how to shoot. He's not happy about this though, given someone could hear them. As the rain lashes down, they sit in the car together and contemplate their next move. With Amos constantly ringing and Downey desperate to get Dina back, they formulate a plot together. Meanwhile, Zoe cleans up the mess back at home, washing off the red writing from the windows. Zoe brings Wayne over after and wants his help in cracking the doctor's laptop. It doesn't take Wayne long, and once they're in, Zoe checks out Downey's file and realises he was subjected to chemical burns. The soldiers there were used like lab rats, and to find out more, Zoe confronts that doctor, Isaac Wright, from the last episode. Wright reveals that histropine is an experimental antidote for a chemical weapon. These tests were done in secret, up in Scotland, but he was blindfolded at the time so he doesn't know the full location. Things at the safe house aren't going much better, given Dina is itchy to leave and supplies are running low. Hamza is tricked by Amos sending him a message from the assassin's phone confirming that the guy is dead. Now Hamza obviously isn't the sharpest tool in the shed and he falls for it without questioning anything. When he gives C a status report, the guy gets into his car and finds Amos there waiting as the driver. Amos wants to make a deal with C. In exchange for a flight and a big pension, he'll send Downey to where Dina is being held and Amos will jump in to clean up the whole mess. They shake on it and Amos leaves, immediately ringing Downey to give him the location. Now on the road, Downey and Sarah seem to attract the attention of the police. Sarah puts her foot down and decides to outrun them, but the thing is the police aren't actually after them, but a little speed trip means they need to switch vehicles. For now, that means doing a big trek through the beautiful British countryside to a nearby village for another ride. Their destination is Downey's sister Ella. She's under the assumption that Downey is dead, so when he shows himself alive and well, Ella is shocked to say the least. And Downey explains he couldn't have come to her sooner, despite wanting to, because of what happened in Afghanistan and the experiments. However, he wants Ella's help now in taking Dina in and giving her refuge if he manages to get her back. Meanwhile, Zoe heads back to Janice where she finds Hamza sniffing around. Zoe confronts him about Joe's body as it seems like he's being released early. Zoe doesn't trust him and eventually kicks the guy out. Now Wayne manages to hack into the deep encryption within the laptop, which happens to be hiding a video that shows off the extent of the attack in Afghanistan. As Wayne watches in horror, Downey explains what happened to him to Sarah. Downey was on patrol with his group when insurgents attacked. A helicopter passed overhead, dropping chemicals on them, and Downey witnessed it all as this snow burned them. The thing is, this helicopter was their own, and they were used as lab rats to find an antidote to it. Only he and Tommy managed to get out. They've been targeted ever since, and the explosion at Tommy's place was supposed to kill him and Tommy. However, Downey survived given he had an argument with Tommy and stormed out prior to the blast. Now Downey's not sure if Dina is his daughter, but does know that he needs to get her back and save her, at least for the sake of the family. Meanwhile, Zoe follows Dr. Wright where she witnesses Amos push him down the stairs. Hiding round the corner, she hears Amos make a call, confirming that he's heading to Scotland. Zoe decides to follow him onto a train bound for Glasgow, but Amos though seems to suss that Zoe is following him. Episode 6 of Down Cemetery Road starts with Zoe on the train. Unfortunately, Amos knows precisely who she is, courtesy of his brother having done the intel on her earlier in the season. Now Amos sits himself down opposite Zoe and looks set to unnerve her. Well, that is until a couple called Shelley and Bob show up and sit on the adjacent seats. Zoe cleverly manages to spark up a chat with them and they start playing board games. It's just a cover she needs to evade Amos, who decides he's content to just watch them and bide his time to strike. However, the game doesn't go on for as long as Zoe would have hoped. The couple have jet lag and turn in early to their cabins, leaving Zoe and Amos to continue this game of cat and mouse along the carriages. Zoe knows exactly what he's planning, and it's certainly touch and go for a while. As Zoe does eventually find an available carriage to hide out in and blocks the door. Whilst there, Wayne rings and reveals he's decrypted the video. He sends a clip over to her, and she sees firsthand that horrific situation with the soldiers. Meanwhile, Downey decides to leave Sarah alone in the woods. As he drives off, C drives to see Hamza and demands he head to Scotland. If not, then he's going to be disposed of. Back on the train for now, Amos decides to orchestrate a fire to draw Zoe out of her compartment. It does the trick as the train is evacuated. However, Amos decides to leave Zoe for now, wanting to go after Downey instead, given how close they are to Dina's location. The taxi Amos steals though happens to hold Shelley and Bob inside. He kills them both and, funnily enough, winds up seeing Zoe race past in a taxi of her own. He makes a call to the authorities, claiming Zoe is the killer and feigning shock himself, before cleaning his own prints off the vehicle and leaving. As for Zoe, she's heading for a disused military base near Firin village. Funnily enough, this is precisely where Downey, Sarah and Amos are all heading to. Sarah makes it to the base and stumbles upon Zoe. As Zoe is convinced that they're close, despite the place being completely cleared out. She's confident that Dina is still alive, prompting the pair to work together from here on out. Unfortunately, that may be easier said than done, given the cops show up at the gnarly crime scene out in the woods. Of course, Shelley has a Polaroid picture with Zoe, which Amos took on the train. This obviously matches the same description Amos gave down the phone. As Sarah and Zoe head back to town, when the former gets herself a Coke for £3.50.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen, mate.
Anyway, she's also encouraged to check out a Puffin Adventure Tour too, and after finding out about the police's description of Zoe, she realises the map for this tour is intentionally missing an island. They have their next port of call, no pun intended. They grab a boat and steal it, charting a course out of the village, while both Downey and Amos have boats of their own, all heading for the same location. Episode 7 of Down Cemetery Road sees all roads leading to Dina. The guards outside the facility on the island are dispatched quickly, as Downey is eventually reunited with Dina. Dina greets him as Uncle Mike and the pair embrace. When Downey needs a minute to catch his breath and pop a few of his pills, Dina shows him the blue teddy that Amos gave her. It's here he realises there may be a tracker inside and leaves it behind as they flee. Unfortunately, Amos closes in on the base and a tense situation ensues as Downey, Steph and Dina try to avoid Amos. Elsewhere, Janice calls D.I. Varma and updates him on what's happening with the military cover-up. Apparently Zoe gave her instructions to call him if she didn't make it home. With her off in the middle of the sea right now, Janice has an envelope of evidence to hand over, which details all the experiments C has been conducting. Atalia is given this information and confronts C about the anonymous tip, but the guy keeps a poker face the entire time and doesn't reveal anything. As we soon find out, Zoe and Sarah are off on the high seas, but having a pretty rough time trying to find their location. They're lost, the compass doesn't work, and to make matters worse, their engine stalls as they run out of fuel. There is a can of fuel in the hold, which is where the captain is currently being kept. The captain eventually hands it over after begrudgingly agreeing to help them, although he does perk up when it means getting back at those damn English. The Scot takes the helm and guides them in the right direction. The pair eventually make it to the island and are reunited with Downey and Dina. However, this happens to be a short-lived reunion as Amos shows up looking for them. Now Amos knows they're in one of the nearby houses but isn't sure which one. He sprays bullets wildly and unfortunately Steph is killed in the crossfire. Downey decides to draw Amos away while the others make a break for it. Unfortunately, Amos gets a jump on Downey first. Amos eventually kills the guy, stabbing Downey in the neck and watching him bleed out. With Downey gone, Amos rocks up on his quad and catches up with the others pretty quickly. Zoe realises it's probably futile to run, so she decides to draw Amos away, while Sarah and Dina head down to the inflatable. However, this involves taking a leap of faith and jumping right into the water from the top of the cliffs. The pair do eventually jump though, while Amos chases Zoe. He fires several shots in her direction, but she manages to hide behind some rocks on the beach, helping her make it out in one piece. When Zoe spies Sarah and Dina on the inflatable, she makes a run for it. Unfortunately, Amos winds up firing at the beach and blows up some of the mines nearby. He then turns his attention to Sarah and Dina after blowing up a mine right by Zoe's location, sending her sprawling, but they're too far away. Sarah and Dina race away, but it's clear this fight is far from over. Episode 8 of Down Cemetery Road begins with Hamza in the Scottish village, watching as Sarah and Dinah make it back to shore. He messages C to let him know what's going on, who replies, "Finish it." Before Amos rocks up though, Zoe appears alongside the Scottish captain Donnie. Turns out she survived the blast, but that's the least of their problems right now. Police obviously have a warrant out for Zoe and are actively looking for her. After getting a ride on the bus to the train station, Amos hotwires a car of his own and heads off in pursuit, as does Hamza. Meanwhile, Talia confronts C about the soldiers and everything that's happened this season. He calls them war criminals and explains that he gave them an opportunity to volunteer in research and development. The military were developing a new weapon and antidote, meaning the soldiers were human guinea pigs. This is obviously deeply immoral, and Talia is shocked to learn the department has committed massive war crimes. However, C reassures her that he has top government agents containing the situation. I really hope he doesn't mean Hamza here because, yeah. Speaking of which, Hamza commandeers the bus Zoe is on and drives straight past the train station. In fact, he drives straight past a whole bunch of other passengers waiting to get on, which might be the most realistic part of this season. Zoe distracts Hamza enough that he loses control and crashes right into a graveyard. Holding the trio at gunpoint, Hamza leads him into the church and waits for backup, given he can't pull the trigger himself. Dinah manages to wedge free a metal spike from the pews here, which she gives to Zoe, while Amos hones in on their location. He throws a grenade inside the church and then confronts Hamza regarding his belittling words against Axel. Now Hamza holds Amos at gunpoint but can't pull the trigger. Unfortunately, despite managing to slip under the church via the vents and make it outside, Dinah immediately looks back inside the church again. Now Hamza spots her at the window and rushes outside to go on the hunt. Sarah is not far behind and eventually holds Hamza at gunpoint with a shotgun grabbed from her bag on board the bus. After a bit of back and forth, Hamza takes a shotgun for himself, looks set to shoot Sarah, and ends up blowing half his hand off when he pulls the trigger. It turns out the plugs were still in and he's left mutilated but still very much alive. As for Amos, he manages to grab Zoe and pulls her back into the church. However, that spike comes in real handy here to turn the tables and she stabs Amos in the eye. He staggers back, slips on a toy train and smacks his head right on the stone, killing him instantly. Now Sarah and Zoe are eventually reunited with Dinah outside and they take off in Amos's stolen car. They eventually get back on the train to London without any issues. En route, Zoe calls Wayne and tells him to go global with what they've uncovered. The pair then toast to Joe while the chemical testing footage goes, for lack of a better word, viral. Talia scrambles to shed all evidence of this in her office, while C is going to take the fall, fired from his position. Apparently he has plans of his own though, and we see this as he leaves Parliament. As he meets with a businessman who welcomes him to the private sector, while Talia is left to deal with a tough public interview. Back in London, Dinah is dropped off with Ella, just like Downey wanted. Zoe and Sarah then part ways, bringing the season to a close. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.